Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and greetings to all panels, participants and fellow viewers of International Conference on Communication, Management and Humanities organized by AID Academy. I am Nur Atika binti Roslan from the Department of General Studies, Polytechnic Merlimau Melaka, and today I will be presenting my own research entitled The Acquisition of Comparative and Superlative Adjectives Among Engineering Students in Polytechnic Merlimau, Malacca. To begin with, English language competency is seen as a key factor in helping Malaysia achieve its goal of producing graduates who can meet global standards, especially in technical and vocational education and training, or TVET, institutions like polytechnics. Moving on, the Department of Polytechnic Education, or DPE, plays an important role in this effort. It aims to produce graduates who are not only skilled with hands-on experience but also highly employable in today's job market. Furthermore, since 2008, all polytechnics have used English as the medium of instruction for content subjects, not just for English courses. This policy is meant to help students use English more often in their studies and prepare them to use the language in real world work related situations. In short, the goal is to help students improve their English in ways that are practical and relevant to their future careers. Now, let me start by highlighting the problem statement of this study. Even though there have been many national efforts to improve English proficiency, many Malaysian students, especially in polytechnics, still struggle with grammar and communication skills. One key problem is their incorrect or inconsistent use of comparative and superlative adjectives. These are basic but important grammar structures used to describe data, make comparisons in technical writing, and communicate clearly in academic settings. Therefore, the main aim is to find out how well they understand and use comparative and superlative adjectives by looking at common usage patterns, types of mistakes, and areas where they face the most difficulty. So, how do adults learn a second language, especially grammar? Basically, according to Cook and Singleton 2014, to speak a language well, you need to understand how it works, like the word order, how words change, and when to use things like or the. This, according to Chomsky 1965, is what we call grammatical competence. It means knowing the rules and being able to use them correctly. Now, here's the thing. Adults learn differently from children. Krashen 1982 believes that while kids pick up language naturally, adults need to think about it more. It becomes a conscious step by step process for them, more like studying than absorbing. That's why Agustina 2013 stated in a study that teaching grammar to adults needs a slightly different approach, something more structured and rule based. Let's take a moment to talk about morphology, which is basically the study of how words form and how they change. According to O'Grady and Archibald, it's about how words are built using different rules. Catterman and Stoneham also describe it as the study of word structure. Now, focusing on adjectives, they play an important role in language. They help us describe or give more information about nouns and pronouns. For example, in a tall building, tall is the adjective. When we want to compare two things, we use the comparative form of an adjective, like saying taller or more interesting. But to get it right, there are specific rules we need to follow. And if we're comparing three or more things, we use the superlative form, like tallest or most interesting. As Hewings pointed out, using the correct rules for superlatives helps show clearly which one stands out the most. So why do students often get comparative and superlative adjectives wrong? Klassen and his team found that low proficiency learners, especially adults, tend to rely on memory instead of really understanding the rules. These leads them to overgeneralize, like adding er or est to every adjective, even when it's not correct. Almani also found that the longer and more complex the adjective, the harder it is for students to apply the right rule. Similarly, studies from Sudan and Albania show that students often make these mistakes because they apply rules too broadly or translate directly from their first language. In short, limited grammar knowledge and habits like direct translation make it tough for learners to use the correct forms. Let's moving on to the research questions and what this study aims to find out. First, research question 1 asks what's the overall proficiency level of engineering students when it comes to using comparative and superlative adjectives. So basically, how well do they use them in a grammar test? Second research question looks at how do students perform when using these adjectives with common versus uncommon words. We want to see if word familiarity affects their accuracy. Third, research question 3 explores which adjective rules are the hardest for students based on their performance. This will help us figure out which rules students struggle with the most. Now, here are the matching research objectives. Research objective 1 is to find out how proficient the students are in overall. Research objective 2 is to compare how they do with common and uncommon words. And lastly, research objective 3 is to identify which adjective rules are more difficult for them. How was this study carried out? First, the researcher used a quantitative approach to analyze the data. The sample included 104 engineering students from semester 1 and 2. They came from three departments: mechanical engineering departments, civil engineering department, and electrical engineering department. As for the test, it had 30 multiple choice questions, all focusing on six different rules for using comparative and superlative adjectives. To make sure the test was valid, it was reviewed by two language assessment experts. A pilot study with 24 students was also done to check reliability, and it turned out well, with a Cronbach's alpha of 0.807, which shows good internal consistency. Scoring was simple: 1 point for a correct answer, 0 for an incorrect one. So the highest score possible was 30. For data analysis, the results were processed using SPSS version 25. I used descriptive statistics to get the average scores, standard deviation, and score range, and inferential statistics, specifically Pearson correlation analysis, to find patterns in the data. Let's take a quick look at the grammar test results from 104 participants. So, starting at the top, only 20 people, or 19%, scored between 25 and 30 marks, which we consider excellent. The students showed strong grammar skills. Then we have 24 participants who got good scores between 19 and 24. That shows a solid understanding, though there's still room to grow. Now, the largest group, 30 people, that's 29%, scored between 13 and 18. This suggests an average level of grammar. They likely understand the basics but may struggle with more advanced rule. Next, 26 participants scored between 7 and 12. That's a low level of proficiency, and they probably need extra support to strengthen their grammar skills. Finally, only 4 people, or 4%, scored below 6. The students showed very limited grammar knowledge and may need targeted help to catch up. So, overall, while some students are doing well, most fall into the average or below average range. This clearly shows the need to focus more on improving grammar skills across the board. Now, let's look at how students perform when using common and uncommon adjectives. On average, students scored higher when using common adjectives, about 64.25 points, but when it came to uncommon adjectives, the average dropped to 56.71. So clearly, uncommon adjectives were more challenging for most students. Now, here's something interesting. There's a moderate positive correlation between the two. R is equals to 0.583. That means when students do well with common adjectives, they also tend to do better with uncommon ones. In fact, the data shows that about 70% of the performance on uncommon adjectives can be explained by how well students handle common adjectives. That's a pretty strong link. And yes, the result is statistically significant with a p-value of 0.028, which is below 0.05. So we can trust this finding. In short, if we help students improve their use of common adjectives, it's very likely they will also get better at using uncommon ones. Now let's look at how students handle different adjective rules for both uncommon and common words. Starting with uncommon words, rule 1, which deals with monosyllable adjectives, had the highest score with a difficulty index of 0.62. That puts it in the easy category, meaning most students were comfortable applying this rule. But for rules 2 through 6, the scores were lower, ranging from 0.50 to 0.58. These are considered moderately difficult. Among them, Rule 3 was the hardest, scoring only zero point 0.5. Now, for common words, the pattern is very similar. Rule 1 again was the easiest with a high index of 0.72, so students clearly feel confident using it. The rest, rules 2 to 6, were again in the moderate range with scores between 0.57 and 0.60, slightly better than the uncommon words, but still showing that students struggle a bit. So, what does this tell us? Across both word types, Rule 1 is the easiest to apply, probably because it's more familiar and simpler. On the other hand, the other rules, especially Rule 3 with uncommon words, are more difficult and likely need more focused teaching and practice. In short, students do well with simpler adjective rules, but they need extra support with more complex or less common ones. To wrap things up, only a small number of students showed strong grammar skills. Most of them scored in the average or below average range. This clearly tells us that many students are still struggling with grammar, and there's a real need to improve grammar instruction and support in the classroom. Overall, students did better with common adjectives. This was clear from the higher average scores. Uncommon adjectives were more difficult, so this is an area where they need more practice. Why do students struggle with some of the adjective rules? The main reason isn't the number of syllables in the words, but simply that many students don't know or recognize the words. It's really a vocabulary issue. When we look at the difficulty levels of the rules, one thing stood out, which is Rule 1, with simple one syllable words was the easiest, whether the words were common or not. But the other rules were more challenging. This tells us that the more complex or unfamiliar a word or rule is, the more students struggle with it. So, overall, if you want students to improve, we need to focus not just on grammar rules, but also on building their vocabulary. So, what can we actually do to help students improve? First, in general, we need to focus more on grammar in our English classes, especially when it comes to using adjectives correctly. That seems to be a key area where students are struggling. And a few specific things that we can try. Number one, let's make sure we're clearly teaching the rule, especially the ones students had trouble with, like rules 2 to 6. That means using clear lessons, real life examples, and giving them lots of chances to practice. Number two, we should also give more attention to uncommon adjectives and tougher vocabulary. Students need to see and use these words in their reading, writing, and speaking, not just in grammar drills. Number three, it would help to use a step by step grammar exercises. Start easy, then build up the difficulty. That way, students at all levels can improve gradually without feeling overwhelmed. And finally, number four, let's include more activities that mix common and uncommon adjectives. These can really boost their confidence and help them get more comfortable with words that they don't use every day. So overall, with the right approach, we can make adjective usage and grammar in general a lot more accessible and a lot less intimidating for our students.